It started with a notification that I almost ignored. My father's name lit up my phone, a small blue dot beside his profile picture. I thought it was just another one of his posts. Maybe something about work or one of those long-winded rants he made to feel important. But when I opened it, my chest tightened. It was a poll, a public poll. The question read, if you could erase one person from the family, should it be her? And beneath it, my name. For a second, I couldn't breathe. My thumb hovered over the screen, scrolling through the comments that came one after another. Laughing emojis, hearts, even jokes about how I'd always been difficult. A few of my relatives had voted yes. So had people I didn't even know. The post had been up for 6 hours before I found it. 6 hours of people laughing, sharing, and voting on whether I deserved to exist in my own family. I told myself it had to be a mistake, some sick prank or a hacked account, but then I saw the replies. My father's own comments, casually engaging like it was all part of a game. "You know how she is," he wrote under one. "Ungrateful. Always wants to play the victim." Another said, "It's just a social experiment. Don't take it so seriously." The words blurred on my screen, my hands shaking as I read them over and over. That night, I sat in my room, scrolling through every line, every emoji, every cruel laugh. I thought of deleting the post, but I couldn't. It wasn't mine to erase. It was his. He wanted people to see it, especially me. Maybe that's why he tagged family members who hadn't spoken to me in years. Maybe that's why he left the poll open for votes instead of closing it. When I confronted him in the living room later that night, he didn't even look surprised. He just smirked and said, "It's a joke." "You take everything too seriously," I asked him why he'd post something like that. He shrugged. "Maybe this'll make you think about how you treat people." My mother stood nearby, quiet, her hands folded in front of her. She didn't say a word, not even when I asked her if she thought it was funny. I went back to my room, trying to calm my breathing, but I couldn't shake the feeling that something inside me had cracked. There's cruelty you expect from strangers, but when it comes from the person who's supposed to protect you, it hits differently. It doesn't just hurt, it rewrites you. As I stared at the poll one last time before logging out, I noticed something new. He'd pinned it to the top of his profile, like a trophy, like I was the punchline to his story. And in that moment, I knew. This wasn't a mistake. It was a message, and it was only the beginning. When I confronted him again the next morning, he didn't even look up from his phone. He was sitting at the kitchen table sipping coffee, scrolling through his notifications like nothing had happened. I asked him why he'd done it, why he'd post something so humiliating about his own daughter. He smirked, not a hint of guilt in his face, and said, "It was just a test." A test. That's what he called it. He leaned back in his chair and said it was social accountability, as if he were teaching a life lesson. "You should see how people really view you," he said. "Maybe it'll help you change." My mother was standing by the counter, stirring her tea in slow circles. I waited for her to speak up, to say something, but she just kept her eyes down, like she was trying to disappear into the sound of the spoon against glass. I told him it wasn't funny, that he'd crossed a line, that he'd turned my name into a spectacle. He laughed. Not loud, but low. The kind of laugh that lets you know someone's enjoying your pain. "You think the world owes you kindness?" he said. "Welcome to reality." I went back to my room, shaking, trying to convince myself that it couldn't get worse. But that night, I checked the post again. It had hundreds of new votes. Familiar names filled the comments. My uncles, cousins, even family friends I grew up around. People who'd once smiled at me during birthdays, who'd hugged me when I was little, now writing things like, She's always been dramatic, or sometimes you need to cut out the bad apple. I stared at their words until they stopped feeling real. The screen blurred, my eyes burned, but I kept scrolling. Every new comment felt like a vote, not against my behavior, but against my existence. My father replied to some of them, casually agreeing, like they were discussing weather, not his child. That's when it hit me. This wasn't just a cruel online joke anymore. It was a verdict, a collective decision that I didn't belong. It was as if they'd all raised their hands to vote me out of my own bloodline, and the man who started it wasn't some internet troll or distant stranger. He was my father. The same man who used to tuck me in at night, who once told me I was his favorite person in the world. Now, he was the one counting the votes. After the poll, the house didn't feel like home anymore. It felt like a place holding its breath. My father moved through the rooms as if nothing had happened, humming while he made coffee, watching his shows at full volume, pretending the world outside wasn't whispering about us. My mother barely looked at me. When she did, it was quick, almost guilty, like her eyes might burn if they stayed too long. Dinner became the hardest part of the day. We sat in silence, forks clinking against plates, the air heavy enough to choke on. I wanted to scream, to make them face what they'd done, but every time I opened my mouth, my father's calm stare shut me down before I even began. My mother would give me that look, the one that said, "Please don't start." I hated that look more than anything. One night, I asked her quietly, "Why didn't you defend me?" She didn't look up from her plate. Her voice was barely a whisper. "You know how he gets." Just that. No apology. No comfort. Just fear wrapped in familiarity. I realized then that she'd stopped protecting me a long time ago. Maybe she never really did. I started locking my door at night. I didn't feel safe anymore, not because I thought he'd hurt me physically, but because every word that came from him did. Every glance carried the weight of what he thought I deserved. I slept with my phone under my pillow, half afraid, half desperate for it to light up again. And it did. Not with comfort, but cruelty. Classmates started sending screenshots of the post, laughing, asking if it was real. Even people from work texted me links. Somehow my father's poll had gone viral in town. People who barely knew me were sharing it, commenting, turning my humiliation into dinner conversation. I thought about deleting my account, but every time I tried, he'd post something new. Smaller, sharper. A quote about ungrateful children. A meme about teaching lessons. Each one felt like a blade twisting deeper. I started avoiding mirrors. I didn't recognize the person staring back anymore. I wasn't angry yet, just hollow. Like he'd already erased me, and the world had agreed. I started recording everything. At first, it was out of fear. Fear that no one would ever believe me. The fights, the manipulation, the gaslighting. I kept my phone nearby, screen dimmed, camera aimed at the corner of the room. I told myself it wasn't revenge, it was survival. My father's cruelty wasn't new. It had just never been this loud before. Now everyone could see what I'd always known, but instead of shame, he doubled down. He called me dramatic, selfish, ungrateful. Said I was ruining the family brand, as if we were a product, not people. Every time I tried to reason with him, his words hit sharper. "You think people care about your feelings?" He'd sneer. "You should be grateful I raised you at all." When he realized I wasn't reacting anymore, he got quieter, colder. He started choosing his words carefully, twisting them just enough to make me question my own memory. He'd say something cruel, and when I'd bring it up later, he'd smile and ask, "Are you sure that's what I said?" It was like living with a man who could rewrite reality in real time. That's when I started replaying the recordings, Late at night, when the house went still, I'd plug in my earphones and listen back. His voice, so calm, so measured, cutting through every second of silence. And mine, small, careful, trembling between anger and disbelief. It broke me to hear how much I still tried to sound respectful, like some part of me was still begging for his approval even as he tore me apart. But those recordings gave me something too. Proof. Not for him, not even for the world. For me. Proof that I wasn't crazy, that the pain had sound. I didn't know then how much I'd need it later, how those files would become my lifeline when the lies started to spread. Still, truth feels heavy when no one wants to carry it with you. People saw my father as charming, respectable, the man who hosted fundraisers and made speeches about family values. They couldn't imagine what he was like when the cameras were off. And maybe that was the worst part, watching everyone love the man who made it his mission to destroy me, one post, one word, one silence at a time. It was past midnight when the message appeared. A stranger's name, no profile picture, no mutual friends. For a second, I almost ignored it, assuming it was just another cruel comment about the poll. But the first line made me freeze. I know who your father really is. I stared at the screen, my pulse rising. The message continued, calm and precise, like it was written by someone who had nothing to gain and nothing to lose. She said she was a journalist, independent, local, and that she'd been following the poll because it had exploded online. She claimed she'd traced the activity behind my father's account, seen patterns, connections to posts and pages that didn't match his public image. He's not just cruel, she wrote. He's hiding something. I didn't reply right away. It felt like bait, a setup. My father was the kind of man who could turn suspicion into a weapon, and I didn't want to give him more ammunition. But then she sent screenshots, dozens of them. Contracts bearing his name, digital trails linked to his charities account, transfers routed through shell companies, donations that never reached their supposed recipients. It wasn't just hypocrisy. It was fraud. My hands shook as I scrolled through the evidence. Documents with dates, signatures, bank stamps. I recognized the logo, the same charity he'd bragged about during TV interviews, the one he said changed lives. The same organization he used to justify every trip, every photo op, every speech about helping others. The journalist told me she'd been trying to expose the network for months, but every time she got close, the story would vanish, pulled from local outlets, editors warned to drop it. She said my father's sudden viral post about me made sense now. He's using the chaos, she said. He made you the distraction. That word, distraction, sat heavy in my chest. I thought back to how confident he'd been after the poll went viral, how he'd smiled when people called him brave for holding his daughter accountable. He'd weaponized humiliation, using my pain to pull every eye away from what he was really doing behind the curtain. For the first time, I realized the truth. The poll wasn't about punishing me. It was camouflage. He wasn't trying to destroy me because he hated me. He was doing it because I was useful, because while the world was laughing at me, no one was looking at him. And now that I knew, I had a choice. Stay silent like everyone else, or burn down the illusion he built, one truth at a time. The journalist's next message was simple. Do you have proof? I hesitated before replying. Proof of what? The corruption or the cruelty? In the end, I sent both. I uploaded the recordings, his rants, his confessions, his taunts. I warned her not to share them yet. She listened carefully, then replied a few hours later. He's good at this, she wrote. Too good. We'll need to be smarter. Over the next few weeks, we worked quietly, piecing together a map of his empire. She had access to data I didn't: bank trails, donation logs, internal reports. I had the inside knowledge, the tone of his lies, the way he talked when he thought no one was listening. Together, we connected the dots. His nonprofit was just a shell, a doorway into something bigger. The donations he bragged about never reached their targets. They went offshore, hidden under fake companies run by his friends, disguised as consultants. Every lie he told online had a paper trail. Every speech about generosity, every story about helping the poor, every smiling photo beside children in shelters. All of it paid for with money, meant for them. Reading those numbers made me feel sick. The same man who mocked me for being too emotional was stealing from families who actually needed help. The man who humiliated me for sympathy was using that same sympathy to fund his empire. The journalist said we had enough to go public, but I knew better. My father was still too powerful, too connected. He'd spin it, twist it, make himself the victim. He'd tell everyone I was lying out of spite. That's what he was best at: control. So I told her to wait. I needed him to think he still had it. I started answering his calls again, pretending to play along. I told him I understood now, that I'd overreacted. He softened, almost relieved, like the world was back where he wanted it. But behind that smile, the walls were closing in. The journalist was saving every file, every screenshot. The donations were being tracked in real time, and he didn't even know he was building his own trap, one lie at a time. I just had to wait for the right moment, the one where his ego would finish the job for me. He called it a celebration of family. That's how the invitation read, the one he sent to everyone except me. A grand birthday party, complete with banners, a catered buffet, a rented hall lit with gold lights. The same people who had voted yes on that poll were all there, dressed up and smiling, pretending the last few months had never happened. My father stood at the center of it all, charming as ever, shaking hands, hugging old friends, the picture of grace. I wasn't invited, but I went anyway. I walked in halfway through the evening, my heart pounding, the air thick with perfume and laughter. Heads turned as I entered, whispers spreading like sparks. My mother froze when she saw me. My father's smile twitched, but he didn't stop the performance. He raised his glass, pretending not to notice me as I made my way to the back of the room. The journalist was there too, dressed like any other guest, her camera tucked discreetly into her bag. She gave me the faintest nod, the signal we'd agreed on. Tonight wasn't about confrontation. It was about exposure. When my father finally took the microphone, he launched into one of his usual speeches. "Family," he began, his voice warm, practiced, confident, "is about forgiveness, about staying united through hardship." He paused for applause, looking out at the crowd like a man who'd conquered every rumor. "We've had our challenges, but love..." That's when I pressed play. The sound came through the speakers like a thunderclap, his own voice, cold and sharp. "The poll wasn't a joke," he said on the recording. "I needed to see who still obeys me." The room went silent. The laughter vanished. My father's hand froze mid-air. The recording continued. Him mocking relatives for pretending to have morals, admitting he'd found the perfect distraction in me, that people focus on drama, not numbers. His tone was casual, arrogant, completely unaware that his words would one day turn against him. When it ended, I looked up. My father's face was pale, his mouth trembling as he tried to find something to say. That's when the journalist stepped forward, camera in hand, the flash breaking through the silence. Reporters from local outlets, tipped off hours earlier, moved in from the back doors. It wasn't a family party anymore. It was evidence, live, public, undeniable. My father's perfect image cracked in real time, the crowd backing away as reality replaced reputation. He looked at me once, eyes wide with something I'd never seen before. Not anger, not pride, just fear. And for the first time, I wasn't the one being erased. He was. By morning, the video was everywhere. Every channel, every feed, every headline. The poll that backfired. Reporters dissected every second of the footage. The party, his words, the look on his face when he realized what was happening. The man everyone had called a pillar of integrity was now the centerpiece of public disgrace. His company began to crumble almost instantly. Sponsors cut ties, donors demanded refunds, and the nonprofit's social pages went dark within 24 hours. It was like watching a kingdom collapse, one built on charm, control, and lies. People who once defended him now called for his arrest. Others posted long apologies, pretending they'd always suspected something. The same relatives who'd voted yes on his poll quietly deleted their comments, their digital loyalty evaporating as quickly as it had formed. My mother vanished from public view. One statement, short and polished, claiming she knew nothing and stood by the victims. For a moment, I wanted to believe her. I wanted to believe that she'd been trapped too, afraid, manipulated, silenced. But then I found her private messages buried deep in the post's early comments, replies under different names, mocking me, laughing along with the crowd. I recognized her phrasing, the way she wrote certain words, the tone that used to make me feel small as a child. Betrayal doesn't always shout. Sometimes it whispers in familiar voices, hiding behind gentle words that turn to knives when you look closer. The house felt different after everything broke. Empty, quieter than it had ever been. My father spent his days in the study, blinds closed, the light from his computer flickering against his face. Once, I saw him standing in front of the mirror, staring at himself without speaking. His reflection looked like a stranger, a man stripped of the applause he thought he'd earned. I should have felt triumphant. The truth was out, and justice was finally catching up. But all I felt was tired. The silence that once suffocated me was now mine, yet it didn't bring peace, only the hollow echo of everything I'd lost along the way. He used to laugh at me for being emotional. Now, he couldn't even meet his own eyes. Courtroom lights are cruel. They expose everything. The tired eyes, the nervous hands, the truth that can't hide anymore. I sat there, palms pressed together, trying to steady the tremor in my fingers as the prosecutor spoke. Her voice was calm, deliberate, each word slicing through the quiet. She read from the evidence file, detailing every transfer, every fake donation, every account my father had used to funnel money away from people who trusted him. Each time she said his name, I felt my stomach twist. For years, he'd made sure that name sounded powerful, respectable. Now it was being read aloud like a warning. When they played the recordings, I wanted to close my ears. Hearing his voice again, the same voice that used to tell me bedtime stories, that once sang along to the radio when we drove home late at night, now cold and venomous, filled with contempt. "You think anyone will ever believe you?" he said in one clip. The courtroom fell silent after that line, the sound of his arrogance hanging heavy in the air. He sat at the defense table, still and unreadable. I waited for him to look away, but he didn't. When his eyes finally met mine, they were hollow, empty in a way I'd never seen before. No anger, no regret, just the look of a man trying to remember when he stopped being the hero in his own story. The defense tried to paint him as misunderstood, a victim of media distortion, a family drama gone too far. But the evidence spoke louder. The contracts, the recordings, the testimony. Every layer of his lies peeled back until there was nothing left but truth. When the verdict came, guilty on multiple counts of fraud and public deception, I didn't cry. The crowd murmured, the cameras flashed, but I stayed still. It wasn't relief or joy that I felt. It was something quieter, heavier, like air returning to a room that had been locked for too long. He once told me that silence was power, that the person who speaks last always wins. But as the guards led him away and the doors closed behind him, I realized the truth. The silence he used to control everyone with didn't belong to him anymore. It belonged to me. It was weeks after the trial when my phone finally rang. I almost didn't answer. The number was familiar, but felt foreign now, like something that belonged to a past life. When I picked up, my mother's voice came through the line, soft, trembling, rehearsed. "I've been thinking about you," she said. "I miss you." For a moment, I didn't know what to say. The last time I'd seen her, she was sitting behind my father in court, silent as he faced everything he'd done. Now she was speaking like none of it had happened, like we were just two people trying to bridge a small misunderstanding. She said she'd been caught between two sides, that she didn't know what to do, that she'd been scared. Her voice cracked in just the right places, but not enough to sound real. I could hear the difference now, the small hesitation between truth and performance. She'd spent her whole life balancing on that edge. I listened quietly, letting her talk herself in circles. Words like family, forgiveness, and healing floated through the call like background noise. I waited until she ran out of breath before asking the one question that had burned in my chest since the beginning. "When he posted that poll," I said, "why didn't you stop him?" The silence that followed was heavy. I could almost hear her thinking, flipping through excuses that wouldn't sound cruel. When she finally spoke, her voice was barely a whisper. "Because I wanted to see how far he'd go." That was it. No apology, no denial. Just quiet complicity disguised as fear. It hit me harder than any insult ever had. She hadn't been powerless. She'd been curious, watching the damage like someone watching a house burn, not to save it, but to see how bright the fire would get. I felt my throat tighten, but no words came. There was nothing left to say that could undo what she'd already admitted. After a long silence, she said, "I hope someday you'll understand." And maybe I did, but not in the way she meant. I understood that some people love you only as long as it's convenient, and when the truth asks them to choose, they choose comfort every time. I hung up knowing that was the last time I'd ever hear her voice. Some ties don't break in anger. They just fade quietly, leaving behind nothing but the echo of a call that should have never been made. I left the city without telling anyone, packed what little I owned into my car, and drove until the skyline disappeared behind me. The air felt cleaner the farther I went, like I was finally exhaling after years of holding my breath. I found a small apartment in a quiet town by the water. No one knew my name there, and that was exactly what I needed. I changed everything online too. New username, new photo, no trace of the girl who had been voted out of her own family. The world moved on faster than I expected. Within a few months, the poll was buried under newer scandals, fresher outrage. People forgot. But I didn't. The echo of it still lived somewhere inside me. The laughter, the comments, the way my father's words had turned into a storm that everyone wanted to watch. At first, I avoided the internet completely. I thought disappearing was the only way to heal. But the silence started to feel too big, too heavy. So, one night, I picked up my microphone again. I started recording, not for proof this time, but for peace. Podcasts, voice journals, quiet stories whispered into the dark. I spoke about family cruelty, about the kind that doesn't always leave bruises but still breaks something inside you. People began to listen. Messages trickled in from strangers who said my words sounded like their own lives. They told me about the fathers who belittled them, the mothers who stayed silent, the wounds they carried quietly. Each story was a mirror, showing me that I wasn't alone, that pain shared could become connection instead of isolation. Somewhere along the way, I realized revenge had never been the point. Watching him fall hadn't fixed anything. Healing did. Rebuilding did. Speaking out did. My father had tried to erase me, and my mother had helped him disappear my voice. But here I was, recording again, louder than ever, carving space where silence used to be. The internet had once been the thing that broke me. Now, it became the thing that helped me rebuild. One word, one story, one voice at a time. Mine. A year passed before I realized what day it was, the anniversary of the poll, the day my own father had asked the world if I deserved to exist. I thought the memory would sting forever, but that morning, when I looked out at the ocean from my small balcony, the water was calm. For the first time in a long time, so was I. I opened my phone, not out of habit, but choice. My reflection stared back at me through the screen. Different now. Softer around the edges, stronger in the center. Without thinking too hard, I scrolled to my photos and picked one from a few days earlier. I was standing by the shoreline, hair tangled in the wind, smiling without realizing it. I uploaded it and started typing. If you could erase one person from your past, I wrote, don't. Let them live with the weight of what they've done. I already did. I hovered over the post button for a moment, my thumb trembling just slightly. Then I pressed it. The picture went live, simple and quiet. No filters, no hashtags, no explanation. Just me. Alive. Unedited. Still here. At first, there was silence. Then the notifications began. Comments, messages, shares, people I'd never met writing words that felt like small pieces of healing. Some thanked me for saying what they couldn't. Others shared their own scars, their own versions of the people they'd once wished they could erase. Every story felt like a heartbeat echoing mine. For the first time, I wasn't reacting to pain. I was creating from it. The girl who had once been a joke, a poll, a public humiliation, now she was something else entirely. Not a victim, not even a survivor, just someone who refused to disappear. By the end of the day, the post had reached more people than my father's ever did. His words had been built on cruelty, and cruelty fades fast. Mine were built on truth, and truth stays. I scrolled through the comments that night, the glow of the screen lighting my face, and for once, it didn't hurt to read my own name, because I wasn't the erased one anymore. I was the reminder of what survives, proof that sometimes the loudest revenge isn't anger or destruction, it's peace, the kind that lives, breathes, and refuses to be silenced ever again. When the people meant to protect you try to erase your existence, survival itself becomes the most powerful form of revenge.